Hello and welcome to Contemplations. I am Josh and I am joined by Beau, who you might know as History Bro or from Epochs. And we are going to be talking about today the perfect society in the mind of Diogenes the Cynic, or the dog as it is translated. But first and foremost, I'd like to thank James Hoffman for the suggestion for doing this topic. I thought it was a really good one. And I do enjoy talking about Diogenes. He's a personal hero of mine, which is a bit of a weird thing to say when you actually get to know a bit more about him. But also, if you do want to submit video comments for suggestions or anything in particular, feel free. We do answer them all in Contemplations, but most of them tend to be directed towards the podcast. And also, if you want any topic suggestions, you can contact me at josh@lotuseaters.com for any suggestions for topics to cover. With that out of the way, I think it's time to get into it. So what I have done, rather than give a potted history of his life and philosophy, is just go through and get a list of anecdotes, which kind of suits Diogenes quite well, because he wasn't someone who, although he wrote 10 books, they're all lost to history, but his philosophy is best demonstrated through his actions, behaviour, and things that people have reported. So I've gone through and just picked mostly amusing stories, although the ones that I think best illustrate his philosophy. There is more out there. I've also got the links where I pulled them from, but it's mainly from sources talking about philosophers from the ancient world, and I'll get onto that in a second. So
he's a funny character, isn't he?
He is indeed.
When you read about him, he does sort of jump out a bit as just being comical, right? I mean, there's a few characters from sort of the early Greek philosophy, sort of from the pre-Socratic. Obviously, this is after Socrates, but
Yeah.
there's a few characters in like early Greek philosophy that are just, well, to us, sort of so off the main beam that it's just funny.
I mean, I think even
Diogenes
Plato's a bit silly,
right.
just because his idea of the philosopher kings and things like that, it's just like, you're a philosopher and you want them to have sole power. That's convenient. But never mind. I will be talking more about Plato in a second. But back to Diogenes. He was born in Sinope. I don't know how it's pronounced. Northern Turkey, pretty much, the northernmost point of Anatolia or Asia Minor, whatever you want to call it, which we'll see on screen. So it's on the coast of the Black Sea, although we do not know the exact date in which he was born, but we know that it was a Greek-founded city, and we know that much, so he was kind of Greek culture, which makes sense because he moves to Greece later on down the line. So his father was a banker, so he wasn't exactly hard done by. It makes his philosophy even more confusing later on down the line. He clearly had a reasonably good life because he followed in his father's footsteps in banking, which has always been a lucrative trade. However, him and his father were involved in a scandal where they were accused of debasing the currency, which is not a good thing to happen to you. So supposedly this is also backed up, this kind of rumour that was circulating why he left was backed up by archaeological evidence, because they found lots of coins from the 4th century BC that have been defaced in Sinope. So it seems like it was something that was actually happening. It wasn't a baseless accusation just to get rid of them. And supposedly the explanation is that the city was in dispute between pro-Persian factions and pro-Greek factions. And it seems like a politically motivated thing. And maybe either they were picking a side or they fell afoul being in banking, and then they just happened to have all of these coins, maybe didn't check them properly or something. It's difficult to know because it's so far back.
But that's a really bad crime, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's really quite bad. I mean, it's sort of among the worst non-violent crimes I think you could do back then. Do we know more details? When you say debased, do you mean the actual base metal was sort of diluted, or were they sort of clipping? Because coin clipping is a thing, isn't it? When you've got a pure coin, but you take a slither off of it.
I did try and look into that, and I couldn't
I don't
find
know.
a conclusive answer, so I don't really want to give one. But that's
fair enough.
the words that are used. I mean, the whole thing's kind of shrouded in a bit of mystery. I imagine the best place to go for that would be the archaeological evidence, but I wasn't able to find the actual research paper where they were talking about it.
Plus, if we are talking about the 4th century BC, then the accounts will be are sketchy.
Of course.
So if you haven't got someone from sort of usually the Roman period writing about it in detail, then it's just lost. We just don't know, do we? So
absolutely,
fair enough.
So this resulted in his and his father's exile from Sinope, and this is where his father kind of becomes lost to history. We don't know what happened to him really, but we know that Diogenes went to Greece, mainland Greece. Supposedly, most of the accounts of Diogenes and what he's done comes from Diogenes Laertius. I don't know how to pronounce these Greek names. You might have a better go than me. It's like
Laertes?
That's much better. That sounds way more Greek than, yeah. Getting me to speak any foreign language isn't great.
Laertius.
That's what. Yeah, that sounds about right. But never mind.
Yes. Okay.
It's in his book On the Lives of Philosophers. So this is where we get most of the anecdotes from, I think. Although there are other ones from people like Cicero and lots of Roman historians. But I'm not so focused on the origins of the accounts today. We're just going to talk about what they're saying about him. And of course, with the fact that they are historical accounts from such a long time, there's inevitably going to be some amount of skepticism warranted with how true they might be. However, you kind of get a very good picture of what kind of character he is, or what kind of character people think he is from these anecdotes. So without going on about it too much, so Diogenes, when he arrived in Athens, he went to the oracle at Delphi to ask for advice, and he was told by the oracle that he should deface the currency, which must have struck him as a bit strange. Either the oracle had heard about his escapades and was playing a bit of a joke on him, I don't know. But obviously, considering the fact that he was exiled from the last place he stayed, he assumed, oh, maybe they don't mean actual coins. Maybe I've got to deface the political currency, not actual coin.
Maybe.
And that seems to be how he must have interpreted it, if this is taken to be true, because he wasn't carrying on in his trade of finance anymore from this point on. So
I think the oracle at Delphi did quite often troll people, essentially. I think.
You reckon? I mean, I've come across a few accounts, but I don't know enough to say anything. Are there any other examples where you think, okay, well,
I've discussed this with Carl before, and we've got a very different opinion on it. But it's my opinion, and not everyone shares this opinion. The whole thing is just a scam. It's just a racket. It's just a way.
Of course, yeah.
It's just a way for old men to make money out of desperate people. And the actual oracle herself is just a puppet, just some silly woman that's just told to do. She just does as she's told.
That seems tongues, entirely obvious, because
just put on some weird theatrical performance, and we'll get money out of people. That's what I think it is.
They're not always right, are they? So.
Well, it's just like deface the currency. What? What are you talking about? Is that supposed to be clever or funny? I'm sure they. Well, I'm not sure, but you would imagine they knew who he was.
Probably, yeah.
And so that's like a not funny, ha ha, but that's like a, I don't know, like a wink, or a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, something like that, or just or this guy's. We don't even like this guy, so let's just send him away with bad information, or whatever it is. I feel like the old men that controlled the oracle. It just had a laugh with it sometimes.
It does seem like it here, because of course the thing that got him exiled, they're like, yeah, you should carry on doing that. That's a good idea.
Maybe the oracle at Delphi really could communicate with the Olympian gods, and they did tell her to say that.
Yeah, I somehow don't think so. So he travelled to Athens to challenge the dominant customs and values, which is very much supported by his further actions, as reported by pretty much everyone. I think that's undisputable, that he was definitely a non-conformist, let's say. He he was trying to make people think about Athenian society and Greek society as a whole very differently than they had came to accept, I suppose.
So that's his whole thing, right? Or that's one of his main.
That's what
things.
He seems to have dedicated his entire life to doing,
Right.
pretty much.
Right.
Pretty much every anecdote is doing this. So
to the point of absurdity.
Yes.
A lot of the time.
Well, I think the absurdity also wasn't lost on him, because I get a picture of the man through all of the stories that are told, and he's not just some maniac that's going around like kind of avoiding the insane asylum before they existed, sort of thing.
Yeah.
He's clearly a switched on person, because he's dealing with philosophers that are respected, I suppose, and pointing out the flaws in their ideas, and that shows some level of comprehension. But we'll get onto that in a second.
Sorry, yeah, okay.
So Diogenes arrived in Athens with a slave named Manes, who eventually escaped, and seemingly he saw the humour in this, because he is reported as saying, if Manes can live without Diogenes, why can Diogenes not live without Manes? So already kind of living that lifestyle in which the oracle has supposedly pushed him towards, or at least his interpretation of what it was, because, of course, when he was exiled, he lost all of his possessions, so this slave would have been one of the few things he probably had, the possession, I suppose. And then, of course, the slave runs away, and that's probably one of his last aspects of his wealth, and he's just kind of brushing off like, well, if he can live without me, I can live without him, that sort of thing. And I'm not sure whether that was just a form of coping with being completely destitute in a foreign city, or whether he actually meant it. But you start to get a measure of the man through his indifference to it, I suppose.
Yeah. Or, I mean, perhaps sort of a deliberate, measured indifference. Perhaps, whether you really
in
are.
what sense?
Well, I mean, it's like you say, putting a brave face on it. It's sort of the easiest thing to do, isn't it? Is to pretend that you're to make a virtue of something really bad happening to you. I mean, I don't know, of course.
Well, I mean, Stoicism kind of has its roots in Greece. It wouldn't be surprising that he was already embodying that kind of philosophy. He seems like a relatively learned person, although his actions don't always seem so.
Well, didn't Zeno, one of the fathers of Stoicism, say that he took a lot of inspiration from Diogenes?
I'm not entirely certain, but it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah. I mean, looking at Diogenes' beliefs, it seems like you could definitely draw a lot from it, because he is quite an aesthete. Is that how you say it? An aesthetic?
An aesthete, yeah. There's that thing, well, so one of the main things is that he lived in poverty, or with hardly any or no real possessions. Right?
Mm-hmm. I'll be getting onto that in a second, but I'm going to talk
Sorry,
about
I'll let you.
I'm going to talk about the kind of formalization of his philosophy first. So he was drawn to the aesthetic teachings of Antisthenes, who was a student of Socrates. And when Diogenes asked Antisthenes to mentor him, Antisthenes ignored him and repeatedly said no, and eventually beat him off with a staff. And supposedly Diogenes responded, "Strike, for you will find no wood hard enough to keep me away from you, so long as I think you have something to say." Which I can imagine him already being a bit of a nuisance at this point. I mean, he's probably a bit of a desperate man too. I mean, he has nothing. So I imagine being a student or being taught is at least, he's going to have some degree of security there, I suppose.
Yeah. He seems to me like, just a difficult person. I think that must have been deliberately cultivated, though.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in fact, there is a long tradition of it. I mean, maybe I'll talk about it in a bit more detail if and when it comes up, but it's in the mould of a Socrates. Socrates lived a long time before Diogenes, right?
Yeah.
A few hundred years before. Couple of hundred. Anyway, and Socrates was known, his thing, his sort of the most famous thing he was known for in his lifetime was, if you weren't a massive fan of him, was being a nuisance. He would walk around the agora, the marketplace, just asking annoying questions to people, like unanswerable.
Well, that's why he was put
annoying
on trial
questions.
eventually, wasn't it? I've read the Death of Socrates, and I really admired him, actually. I think he's great. He's one of my favourites because he was a nuisance. That's why I liked him, which is probably not... But he was going around just gently prodding people's beliefs, and I think it got under people's skin. He's just like, well... Like he spoke a lot about the gods and religion and things like that, and I think that's poking a hornet's nest a little bit, isn't it? In any society.
Yeah. I don't know if it was all that gently as well. Sometimes they go around saying, "Why do you think that happened?" And people say, "Oh, because of the gods." And you just be like, well, "Why do you think that? What makes you think that?" People are like, "Oh, I don't like you."
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.